Lakeview Village is a hidden treasure.
Most of the residents are in independent living, and so they're really a physically active community.
And I don't have a big support system except for my financial advisor. And she said, Penny, I don't care where you go. I just want you to go to a life care program.
I've been at Lakeview Village 5 years. We came to Lakeview Village when we were 70. I like that it's a place where we can stay and be cared for.
And the thing about Lakeview is if you qualify financially and especially medically, they will take care of you for the rest of your life.
I thought it was a little early for us to come here. But after about 6 months, I realized, no, you need to come to Lakeview as quick as you can because there's so much stuff to do here. There's more things to do here than you got time to do.
Art, music, writing, poetry and prose, card-playing clubs, exercise groups.
Well, the first thing that I saw over here was the indoor warm water, 68 degree swimming pool, salt water. And so my exercise is getting up in the morning and going over to Heritage and swimming my mile.
There are always activities going on. If I want to go to the theater, to the opera, to the symphony, I can sign up for a bus and not have to worry about the parking or the driving and come back.
A few of us who are interested gathered together to talk about creating Lakeview Village University, taught by our residents. Can't bring somebody else in to do it. You teach it. To financial aid things by people who know what they're talking about, to a woman who has featured just come bring your favorite music. But this is kind of special when it's really taught by people who've lived their lives in that field doing some things.
And they encourage people to have pets because it keeps you more active.
And people are extremely friendly.
I go downstairs at 6 o'clock every night, eat dinner with interesting people who have had different life experiences than I've had, some who have had similar life experiences that I've had.
There were all kinds of housing options from single-family homes to high-rise apartments, and when I toured this building, the North Point building, I was shown an apartment on the 5th floor facing the lake that's behind me, and that did it.
The tower had my living, and it had my studio, it had the restaurant, it had the workout space.
One of my concerns about staying in my house even past 75, how difficult it had become to find a repairman, to find someone to help with plumbing or a new countertop or whatever.
I don't want to take care of a house anymore. I don't want to mow the yard, I don't want to have it painted, I don't want to replace a water heater, I don't want to do any of that stuff.
The guys are out plowing the road first thing in the morning.
The other thing that I really love about living at Lakeview Village is that it's lock and go for travel.
We have 24-hour security. We know all of the people that work security.
We have a bookstore, we have a bank, we have restaurants.
For me, I wanted to make sure I was in a place where I did have community, and I certainly have found a wonderful community here.
Lakeview Village is in a quiet location. It doesn't have highways zooming past. It feels like a neighborhood.
I always, when I walk around, it's like it has that small town feel to it. You know, like my hometown where I was born. And I love that feeling.
And I would encourage anybody that's even contemplating it, come to Lakeview. We are not your mother's retirement home.
Welcome to this webinar by Lakeview Village. I'm Melissa Smith, and our special guest today is a financial advisor, he's an author, he's a speaker, he's a dad, he's all kinds of great things, and he's especially a specialist, if you will, when it comes to seniors and making great financial decisions when it comes to choosing a retirement community. Brad Breeding, how the heck are you?
I'm great. Melissa, thank you so much for having me.
Well, we're glad to have you, and we're excited to understand and learn more about how we can connect better information to our financial advisors today, who, of course, we have to talk to at this stage of our life, right? So to be clear, I want to be really, really clear that this webinar today, that you are not to replace our personal financial advisors, that you are here to educate us. You're here to also educate financial advisors if they've tuned in as well today, and really to help us navigate these decisions about possibly moving to a life care community like Lakeview Village, right?
That's exactly right. I am not here to replace anybody's advisor. Obviously, an advisor is going to have a lot more information on a person's circumstances than I do, but I hope to give some maybe tips, information, guidance that can help the individual and their advisor as they go through that planning process together.
Brad, why are you so passionate about this subject? You've been talking about this for a little while.
I have, yes. So I spent about 12 or 13 years as a personal financial advisor myself. I still maintain my CFP designation and all that. I no longer actively practice, but it was really back when I was an advisor where I saw the need among retirees who are just navigating all these different options that are out there and really just overwhelmed. And a lot of times not even knowing really where to start or what questions to even ask. And so that's where this all started for me. And I just noticed how helpful it was when you're able to bring that type of information and guidance to folks. It's a relief because there's a lot of things going on in their lives and everybody's lives. We're busy, right? And it's a big decision. And so for me, I just think I just like when I'm able to help somebody take something that is really muddy and make it a little less muddy, right? And make it a little easier to go through that process.
That's a great way of putting it because, it does. It feels kind of overwhelming sometimes thinking about all of the nuances of what a move like this could be. Well, what grabbed Lakeview Village's attention recently was this blog that you wrote about how financial advisors unintentionally will overlook some things when they're calculating the cost of a CCRC life care plan model community like Lakeview Village. And that's why we have you here today, so that we can speak to that specifically, as well as to some of the other elements that we need to think about before we make this decision. Before you pop up your presentation, which is next, would you mind popping up the slide for me on how to ask a question? I want folks to know that they can ask a question at any time during Brad's presentation. And just a little reminder as to how to do that. This box that we're in, where you see the presentation and you see, Brad and I off to the side, right below, if you go down, you're going to see a form that's right there on the web page. Just put in your name, put in your question, hit submit, and that will go straight to Lakeview Village, and they will make sure that Brad gets your questions answered, okay? So just wanted to remind folks about how to do that today, and they can do it at any time during the presentation. Okay, Brad, it's time to educate us. We need to talk with our financial advisors, our financial planners about, getting the most accurate financial information together so we can make a really good decision. I'll let you take it away, okay?
All right. Sounds great. Thank you. And thank you all again, Lakeview Village, for having me. As Melissa was talking a moment ago, she mentioned the blog post we did and that advisors sometimes overlook some important things in this decision. And I want to be clear that it's, for me, I don't even think it's so much that they're overlooking it. I mean, I think it may just be that they don't understand or haven't had the opportunity to understand some of these things. And sometimes it's even that perhaps the planning software that they're using just isn't equipped really to navigate, to sort of incorporate some of the nuance that comes with senior living. I know that's what I had discovered. The planning software I used was great if I wanted to figure out how much long-term care insurance somebody needs or what the cost of care to do to their plan, but it really didn't incorporate all the different things that I began to learn about this process. And so that's kind of what I want to bring to light with this presentation today. And so finding your path forward, consulting with your advisor on the lifestyle and financial considerations of a life plan community. So my understanding is, before I jump in, that I think Lynn and the team at Lakeview did a presentation maybe on site not long ago, and there may be a little overlap. If any of you were in that meeting, there may be some overlap here early in this presentation, but then we'll move along from there and talk, get a little bit more into some of the financial implications and so forth. But for me, I think it's important to lay the kind of start at that ground level, sort of lay the foundation and work from there. So I like to start with kind of what's the decision process. I think this is important for the individual, the prospective resident, as well as for that advisor. So number one, I think it's really important to have those discussions, not only with the advisor, but also with your family and everything else about, what's really important to you and why is that important. This type of planning that we're talking about, planning this next phase of life, this next chapter, your retirement living options, it very much is a plan or requires a plan. And that plan is going to look different for everybody based on all kinds of things. So what's really important to you, not just now, but thinking about your future as well, and why are those things important to you? I think that's a great discussion for anybody to have with their advisor. And as I said, with your family members and so forth. But once you do that, then the key is understanding what are the options. What are the different options out there? Because there are so many different types of senior living choices. And a lot of times they can look very similar, particularly from the outside. They may all kind of look the same. So, you really have to understand what distinguishes one from another. And the next step in this process is really kind of pairing those first two together. Once you understand what's important to you and what the options are, now it's okay. Let's find alignment. Which options out there are best for what's really important to me? So at that point, you'll start to do your research, sort of narrow down those options, do a deeper dive in understanding everything about those, about the community or the communities that you're looking at. And then, is it a good financial fit for you? Obviously, we'll focus a little bit more on some of this today, but does it make good sense for you financially, not only now, but again, down the road? If you need care and those kind of things, how does that impact that decision, and how does it impact your financial picture? Once somebody's gone through all those steps, hopefully they are in position to make a more confident decision, that they feel more empowered to make a more confident decision about the future. So when we talk about planning, okay, there's a couple different ways. You hear the word retirement planning. For some people, that means planning for retirement. For other people, and really for what we're doing here, it's more about planning through retirement. And so it takes on a little different sort of scope than planning for retirement. And, so when we think about planning more sort of broadly, when we widen the scope of what retirement planning really looks like, these are some of the things that are, I would say, the most common concerns among most people that are looking at these types of decisions. Number one is serious health problems. No big surprise there. Obviously, those can have a pretty big cost associated with them in some cases, just depending on what type of situation it is. Not being a burden on family also is a very important. That's probably one of the top things that we hear is, I don't want to be a burden on my family. I've seen what that looks like, so planning for that. And there's a financial aspect to that as well, because quite frankly, a lot of times the family members, the adult children or whoever it is, they often not only take on the sort of the physical aspects and of being there and being available and looking after their parents and loved ones, but sometimes that can be a financial impact. Time away from work, has a direct impact there. Time away from work means they oftentimes can't save as much, perhaps, for their own future. There's certain bills that so forth sometimes family members end up paying. So, there can be that added burden on family as well. Running out of money to live comfortably. I have seen people that, on paper, are what most people would consider quite wealthy, but yet they became that way because they were very careful with how they spend their money, and they want to make sure that they're making the best decisions. And so even then, there's always sort of this sense of, is it going to be enough? What happens if I need a extended stay in care? What happens if I need several years of care? What's that going to do to my finances and my estate? Loneliness, not having a sense of purpose or feeling a lack of purpose. Those two things are very close. Loneliness sometimes leads to a lack of purpose, or that feeling of lack of purpose. And then, security, safety, security. And so looking at these kind of things, as I mentioned a moment ago, when we really widen the scope of retirement planning, you realize that all of these are really important. These are all things to think about. But furthermore, the bigger point to this for me is that where you live, where somebody lives throughout their retirement years, really plays a role in all of these things. To some degree, where you live with a lot of these will impact what these look like or the extent to which they have an effect in your life. So housing is a very important part of a retirement plan when we think about planning through retirement. So it's really hard to kind of take the next step in planning without understanding what the different options are that are out there. So I'm going to kind of go through these quickly, and you'll have a copy of this presentation, I think, available to you later. But let's just start that basically every option that's available for when we talk about where to live through your retirement years. Of course, your home is the first one. Most people say they want to stay in their home. I can understand why. It's comfortable, it's familiar, the memories and so forth. But as we look at these options, you'll notice across the bottom of the screen, I have no help needed. On the left side of the screen, on the right side, 24-hour care. And then, of course, in between that, there's some, supportive living, assisted living, those kind of services. That represents the full continuum. And so your home really fits on that far left side, okay, for those who are living independently. Now, that's not to say you can't bring care into your home, but your home itself does not provide care and is not probably, certified for care and those sort of things. So that's why that was on the left side of this chart. Next, we have active adult neighborhoods. These are basically 55 and older neighborhoods where you probably buy the home in many cases, pay HOA dues for maintenance of the exterior. The homes, again, are for 55 and older, so maybe they're designed a little bit more for an older adult population. Maybe there's a clubhouse, maybe a pool, golf course, even those kind of things. But in these communities, there's no care available. So it's still like the first one, really. You're still living in your own home. So if you need advanced care, it's where do we go now? What's the best situation from here? Senior apartments, very similar to the one I just described, except they're apartments and not freestanding homes. Senior apartments are, just as the name implies, they're just apartments for people 55 and older. So usually not a dining plan. That's sort of what distinguishes senior apartments. There's no dining facility a lot of times, no meal plan. They are just apartments for 55 and older residents. Then you get into independent living, rental retirement communities. Couple of things here that make them different from the previous option. That dining plan that I mentioned, usually a dining facility, usually more common areas, multi-purpose rooms, more of those types of amenities. And they do provide some care. And that's why it gets a little shady here, because that this is a shaded bar, because it's different from one community to the other. So it's hard to say exactly how far that stretches out on this graph. But some rental retirement communities provide a little bit of care. Others provide a little bit more. But all of them stop short of providing full 24-hour skilled nursing care. Assisted living and nursing homes really focus on the far right side of this. Obviously, residents in these facilities are receiving some level of care. They're not living independently. And then lastly, you have a life plan community like Lakeview Village, which covers that full continuum. Okay, so life plan communities, they're regulated at a state level. One state can define them different than another state, but generally speaking, they're going to cover that full continuum in some way, shape, or form so that residents can kind of go through and they don't have to move again necessarily if they need higher levels of care. So I know I went through that really quickly, but again, without understanding what these options are, it's hard to know how to plan. Because remember, I said understanding what's important to you and then what the options are that are out there and kind of pairing those together. So this is really a starting point in the planning process, is thinking about what's important, not just now, but like if I need care later and that kind of thing. So characteristics of a life plan community, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I'll just say life care or life plan communities like Lakeview Village, there's that contract, that continuing care contract in place where all that care is typically available on site. There's different contract models, okay, different ways that you can pay for care if you need it later. So I'm going to touch on that a little bit as we go through this today. So what I want to start with is that most life plan communities, about 85% of them, require an entry fee. Okay, so this is in your conversation with your advisors, there may be some questions, should I go to an entry fee community? There's another community over here that's a rental community. They don't have an entry fee. Why should I consider an entry fee community, or what are the trade-offs? And my job is not to tell you whether which type of community is best, but I want to help you understand the trade-offs so that you can make an educated decision on some of these things. And so the entry fee model really sort of evolved out of a model that's been around over 100 years. And it used to be way back when people would have to turn over all of their assets. It was a church, way back then. A church oftentimes looking after a widow, and they would say, we're going to take care of you. We're going to provide housing and health care and all these things for your life. But the person would have to assign all their assets to that organization. Well, no longer does it work that way. There are a couple out there that I've seen that still do that. But by and large, that is not how it works. And I won't go over the 100-year history, but eventually that evolved into an entry fee contract where no longer do you have to assign all of your assets to the organization. Nobody wants to do that anymore. But, to make the model work, that's sort of where that entry fee comes in. It's a combination of entry fee and monthly fees to sort of make this model work. And when I say make it work, what I mean is, like here in North Carolina, life plan communities are considered quasi-insurance contracts, okay? Because they are providing that care in the future, sometimes at a discounted rate. So there's a little bit of crossover really between how they work and a long-term care insurance policy. And so because of that, again, there's a certain model and that's how, and you'll see as we go through how that works. But when we talk about entry fees, I just want to make sure everybody understands that there's usually going to be options out there. Okay. So if you go to a community like Lakeview Village or some other, what you'll sometimes find is they say, all right, we've got a few different options on how this entry fee works. The first one might look like this. You'll pay the entry fee, okay, as you see here. And then if you move out or in the event of death, let's say in the second year, some of that entry fee is refundable. In this example, it's 75%. And let's say that happens in the third year. Well, maybe 50% is refundable. In the fourth year, maybe 25%. And then after that, there's no more refund remaining. So a lot of communities, not all of them, but some, you'll find that some offer something that looks like this. It's a declining balance refund over those first few years. Now, this example goes out 4 years. Some may stretch 5, some may only go 3. But the point is that entry fee refund is there and it declines over those first few years. You may find others that work like this. For the same exact home, the same exact apartment or home or whatever it is you're looking at, you would pay more for an entry fee, all other things being equal. But with this example, that entry fee never goes below 50%. And yet you might even find one like this. Again, all other things being equal, you'll pay a higher entry fee, but in this example, it never goes below 90%. I think Lakeview Village might have a 75% or something like that. I'm sure they can talk to you more about what's available there, but these are just conceptual examples of how the entry fee models work. So there again, in terms of planning and understanding the options, I think it's important to understand these trade-offs and how these entry fee refunds work.
Hey, Brad, popped in here. Just curious, how do we know what is going to be the best for us? Or is that sort of like just information for us to know as we make the big picture decision? But it's kind of trying to figure out how important is it that we know this stuff right here?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. And, for financial advisors, they'll understand this. It's really a time value of money calculation. I mean, in terms of, that entry fee refund and how valuable that is in the big picture of things. You can kind of see the trade-off here of paying, less, but getting less back versus paying more and getting more back. And so, I talked earlier on about kind of how that software, the software that I used to use as an advisor, there really wasn't a way for me to pull that refund back into the projection. I had to sort of finagle the software and all of a sudden just show money coming in the last year and that kind of thing. So, making sure you just account for all these details and having, where you can run different scenarios. If I have this entry fee refund and I live another 10 years versus 15 years versus 20 years, how does that look? But there's no one that's right, for everybody. You have to be able to kind of run those numbers.
Got it. Thanks.
Okay, so now that we've talked about the entry fees, we understand a little bit about sort of the history of that model and where that came from. I want to also talk a little bit about the monthly, because this is where it becomes really important in terms of planning, because they don't all work the same. So a lot of retirement communities you'll find will offer a contract that looks like this. Okay, this is called a fee for service contract. And with a fee for service contract, if I'm an advisor, my client's looking at this and I'm trying to plan it out, I need to understand that with this contract, if my client needs assisted living down the road, they are going to pay for that assisted living at that time. So they'll pay more when they need care. If they need a higher level of care, if they need skilled nursing, 24-hour care, they will, as you can see on this graph, pay even more at that point. They'll pay more for care. So with a fee-for-service contract, as that label or as that title implies, you will pay for that care. You'll pay for those services as you go, as they're needed. Okay. And of course, the challenge is we don't know how long you'll need care or how much care you'll need. So with a fee-for-service contract, in essence, you have unlimited out-of-pocket exposure. And that doesn't mean it's bad. Some people like it because they say, well, I only pay for care if I need it. But at the same time, if you need it for a long time, that can add up. So the other option you'll find out there is a life care contract. And again, I know the staff at Lakeview can talk to you about these things because I believe they offer both of these in some way, shape, or form. But a life care contract, if you look at it side by side with what I just described, works more like this. Now, again, this is conceptual. There can always be nuances to all this. But with a life care contract, essentially, you will probably, and I'll say again, all other things being equal, you will probably pay more while living independently, either in the form of a monthly fee or maybe from that entry fee. But one way or another, you'll pay more while living independently. However, if you ever need care, you'll notice that you continue to pay the same thing. So the trade-off here is that you have predictability. While you may pay a little bit more up front, perhaps, you have predictability. You know what your out-of-pocket exposure is going to be, no matter how long you live or how much care you need and all of those things. Now, you always need to talk, whether it's Lakeview Village or any other community, you need to find out exactly how their contracts work. Again, there can be, I've even seen hybrids of this and so forth. But conceptually, you just need to understand these trade-offs. So there again, if I'm an advisor helping a client and they're looking at one community on one side of town that's fee for service and another one that's life care, I need to understand that so that when I'm running those projections, I know how to do an accurate comparison of those two. So if I'm going to plan for 3 years of care in my projection or 4 years, maybe I want to look at a worst case scenario. What if you needed, well, I should not, who knows what the worst case, but if I said, what if you need 6 years of care? Well, it would make a big difference between these two contracts. So that's why understanding these things is so important. Modified is kind of a hybrid of those two, where you'll pay more if you need care, but at a discounted rate. So I would need to know what that discounted rate is. So all of this goes back to really understanding what those details are. And then there are some, remember I said life plan communities, about 85% are entry fee. There are some that are rental communities. I don't know how many there in your area, wherever you are, but where I am here in Raleigh, North Carolina, we actually have 2 rental life plan communities, no entry fee. Okay. And they like to promote that. They like to say no entry fee, no buy-in, that kind of thing. However, their monthly fees are substantially higher than the entry fee communities in this area. So if you don't have an entry fee, you've got to charge more on a monthly basis. Again, I hate to keep, not to be like a broken record, but I always say all other things being equal, because there's lots of things that could make the pricing different at one community than another. I mean, one just might simply be a lot nicer than the other. But, if you're kind of doing an apples to apples, if there's no entry fee, you've got to charge more on a monthly basis. And so that's what rental communities do. Now, all of these can have, any retirement community can have inflationary increases. Obviously, you have to factor that into your projections. I get asked about that all the time. Ancillary charges that fall outside of the base contract. Some are a little more a la carte. Some are a little more all-inclusive. You need to understand that. It's all, again, hard to plan if you don't understand that. So hopefully these are some things that can help you as you're thinking, what do I need to know to really think about what this looks like for me financially when I run some different sort of scenarios and calculations. Okay, so let's talk for a moment about long-term care insurance, because I get this question a lot. The first thing I want to make clear, and I think advisors understand this, but long-term care insurance, even though it's a really valuable part of a plan, it is not a plan in and of itself. In other words, you're good, you have long-term care insurance, is not a plan. Long-term care insurance really helps with the expense part of a plan. And some long-term care policies do offer care coordination services and things like that. But the long-term care policy, by and large, is really about paying for care and arranging care if and when you need it. But it's not there to help you really plan out, this next chapter of your life in terms of your lifestyle. Remember, we talked about your purpose, social engagement, and how incredibly important that is to our health, by the way. So social interactions on a daily basis, living somewhere that you're going to be vibrant, active, healthy, social, at least to the extent that you want or need to be. So long-term care insurance is great, but it doesn't constitute a plan. That said, let's talk about kind of how it works. One of the questions I get asked all the time is, can I use my long-term care insurance at a life plan community? So I just went through those examples, right? So let's look at those again. Let's say you're looking at a life plan community and they offer a fee-for-service contract. Well, obviously, long-term care insurance can work quite well in this situation because you'll pay your monthly costs for independent living, whatever that is. And that can vary too, depending on whether it's a 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, maybe even a 3-bedroom, whatever, whether it's a home or an apartment. But if you need care, you'll pay for it. If you had long-term care insurance, obviously that would offset that cost. Okay, so that'll offset some of that cost of care down the road. So that can work quite well. What about life care? What about a life care contract? Well, even here, it can actually work even better in some cases, because with this one, your monthly cost does not go up when you need care. Okay, at least not to pay for care. That's not to say there aren't other things that might come into the picture, but you're not going to pay more specifically for care necessarily. And in that case, you would still have your long-term care insurance, but now you'll see you're paying even less than over here with the fee-for-service. So long-term care insurance can work quite well with a life care contract. Now, in just a moment, I'll mention a couple of things you need to ask about and so forth.
Hey, Brad.
Modified? Yeah.
I'm sorry. On this live, and maybe you're going to get to this, I just feel like this can be sort of confusing for all of us because, particularly if we have spent the money on having this kind of insurance, then are you saying that the fee for like a Lakeview Village type community can actually go down because we have that long-term care insurance, or no?
Yeah, what I'm not saying the fee will go down, but what I'm saying is your net cost could go down.
Oh, I see.
Right?
Okay.
After the long-term care insurance kicks in, your net cost after the long-term care insurance could be down here. So
yeah, I gotcha.
And I'm not even showing what the amount of coverage is in this. Again, everything I'm showing is conceptual, but let's just say this was $5,000-6,000 a month of coverage. Well, over here, you can see kind of what that would do. And then here on Life Care, your cost stays relatively flat, but now you've got the long-term care insurance kicking in. So here's your net cost after that coverage.
Nice. Okay. Thanks for the clarity.
Yeah, good question. Thank you for asking that. And then, right across the board, you can kind of see, so I don't have to get into that. But here's one of the things that I think is important to understand, though, is number one, a couple of things you need to understand. Number one, what does your long-term care insurance policy cover? That's really important. Hopefully, most advisors will know to look at that. You don't want to wait until you need care to start looking at your policy. So you want to understand that early on. And one of the things is understanding, as I said, what it covers. Some of the older policies, the newer ones don't do this, but some of the older ones would say, we'll give you 100% of your coverage if you're in a community or in a facility, if you will. But if you get care at home, we're going to only cover at 50% of your benefit, 75% of your benefit, something like that. Now, in that case, you can think about how important it would be to understand, how does that policy define a life plan community like Lakeview Village? Do they consider that to be in-home care? If I'm in my apartment or in my cottage home or whatever the option is within a life plan community, and I just want to bring care into my independent living apartment, okay, well, is my insurance company going to consider that home care or facility-based care, since I'm in a broader life plan community? So understanding those policy definitions, how it defines a life plan community or a continuing care retirement community. And these are things I would talk with Lynn and the team at Lakeview Village. They have helped people with this, find out, what sort of caveats that they've run across and things of that nature. But, that's one of the things, just to understand what it covers and have those discussions, not only with your insurance company, but also with the staff at the retirement community, just to make sure you've covered all your bases. But in terms of using it, yes. I mean, what really triggers a long-term care insurance claim is not necessarily where you're living. It's whether you're unable to do those activities of daily living. So, if I'm unable to bathe or dress or what have you, that's the type of thing that I'm going to then submit for a long-term care insurance claim and a doctor's letter certifying that, in fact, I do need that type of help. So that's what you're going to do to file a claim. Where you're living isn't really as important, other than what I mentioned a moment ago, as far as understanding whether it's compatible and that kind of thing. Another thing I get asked about a lot is the medical expense tax deduction. And I think even some advisors have questions around how this works, because I've seen different things out there about this, and sometimes it's can be quite confusing. And I've even heard people say, well, we can offer medical expense tax deduction at our community, because I've heard people that work at retirement communities say we can offer a medical expense tax deduction here because we're a nonprofit. And those don't have anything to do with each other. The nonprofit retirement community, there are other benefits and advantages perhaps of that. But the medical expense tax deduction is something that is available to anybody, really anytime. It's just that when you move into a retirement community like Lakeview Village, there may be even more that you can now add to that potential deduction. So I'll explain quickly how that works. So any of us, whether we live in a retirement community or not, we can potentially take a medical expense tax deduction each year. We have to itemize our taxes in order to do that. So you can't take the deduction if you take this or you can't take this medical expense deduction if you take the standard deduction, which more people are doing now because it's higher than it used to be. But if you add up all of your medical expenses for the year, okay, your qualified unreimbursed medical expenses, and then you look at the difference between that and 7.5% of your adjusted gross income, that difference can be deducted. Again, if you itemize. And if you had a year where you had really high medical expenses, it might make sense to itemize. But that's how the deduction works typically, whether you're living in a retirement community or not. So what happens if you're in a community like Lakeview Village? How does it change things? Well, you still can, you look at adding up all those medical expenses for the year. But now, if it's year one, some portion of that entry fee can potentially be deducted. Not the refundable piece, but any part that's not refundable. There may be a tax deduction associated with that in year one, in the year you pay that entry fee. And it can be, I've seen anywhere from 20 to 40% is deductible. Okay. So you've got that. And then in every year on an ongoing basis, some portion of your monthly fee at that retirement community may also be deductible. Again, 20, 30, 40%. The residents will normally get a letter every January that sort of describes, hey, here's what the deduction is for the year. And you can take that to your accountant. This is not tax advice. Obviously, you'd want to go through this with your tax advisor to determine if it makes sense to try to take that deduction. But that's the way it works. So now you can just add that to your other medical expenses for the year, as you see here. And then you're still looking at the difference between that and your 7.5% adjusted gross income. So for somebody that normally takes the standard deduction, you might find when you move in that all of a sudden it makes more sense to itemize. You just have to, again, sit down with your tax advisor who can run these numbers for you. But that tax deduction can make a pretty big difference on a monthly basis. And certainly in that first year, if you get a pretty sizable deduction in that year you move in, then there's all kinds of planning opportunities around that, perhaps, for you to talk with your advisor about. As we move to sort of close up here, I want to go through one more thing that I think can help in planning. And that's one of the biggest questions people ask, is it cheaper to stay home? And I won't say that my experience has been that, yes, a lot of times, particularly if the mortgage is paid off, it can be less expensive to stay at home. That doesn't always mean it's the right choice because there's so many other things to consider. But purely from a financial standpoint, it may be less expensive to stay at home. But what I've also found is that there may not be as much of a difference as people realize or may think. Okay, so some of the things to really think about there are, number one, you want to consider in your own home the cost of home maintenance on an ongoing basis. That can vary, obviously, from one person to another. There's an old sort of a rule of thumb, just kind of a benchmark, I guess you might say, that your home maintenance can be anywhere from 1% to 4% of your home value on an annual basis. So if you're in an older home, it might be more towards that 4%. If it's a brand new home, maybe closer to the 1%. But if you're living in your own home, that's just kind of, that's something to think about. Those home maintenance expenses add up. I know that because it seems like every week something pops up in our house. We happen to have an older home. So the other thing, another thing is when you move to a retirement community, and this gets in a little bit into kind of the contracts I talked about earlier, but here's another example that I don't think people often understand. If you are in a double occupancy, this doesn't apply as much with life care. I explained life care earlier, but fee for service. If you're in a double occupancy apartment or home and one person all of a sudden needs care, sometimes for the person still in the independent living, it can drop from double occupancy down to a single occupancy rate. So you're paying for care on one hand, but your cost in independent living has adjusted a little bit. So there's just little nuances like that it's really hard for me in a presentation to go through every little detail like that. You need to incorporate into planning. But it really, I guess the way to summarize this is just you want to think about what happens to my expenses on a monthly basis if I need care, but also what happens if one or both of us need care. How can that adjust things? So that's really kind of what I'm getting at here. Another important thing to think about is a lot of what you pay for right now at home is probably going to be covered under your monthly service fee at the retirement community. So sometimes I think what people will do, and maybe even advisors, if you're, whatever your monthly budget is living at home today, it's going to be all over the map for different people. But, if you spend $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 a month, whatever you spend at home, and you think about the things that includes your property taxes, homeowners insurance, security alarms, maybe gym memberships, maintenance, lawn care, housekeeping, groceries. You add all these things up and you realize, well, now I'm looking at this monthly fee at the retirement community. I got to pay an extra however much, but it may not be, because again, a lot of those things you're paying for are probably going to be covered in that monthly service fee. So your net difference, your cost difference may not be nearly as much as you think when you start to really add those expenses up and compare one to the other. So I think that exercise is really important. What do I pay for now and what would be included in this monthly fee? I've even heard some people say they're paying less living in a retirement community than they were at home. If you're doing long-term care projections, or not long-term care, I should say just long-term projections in general, you need to think about, make sure you're doing apples to apples. In other words, if you're going to do some projections of what it costs to live at Lakeview Village, maybe you make the assumption that, well, what if one day I need, nursing care for 6 months or a year? Well, you would want to make that same assumption living in your home. Okay, so the difference is if you're in your home, where and how are you going to get that care? If you bring care into your home for 24 hours, it could cost twice as much as it could cost to receive it in a community or in a facility. 24-hour home care is extremely expensive. So you want to be sure that you're, again, looking at these things apples to apples. And that's just the cost. That doesn't get into who has availability, what's the quality of care that they're going to offer, all of those kind of things. So having a plan in advance, there is some value to that that maybe is hard to quantify. Property taxes, I mentioned that a moment ago, but that's a big one. And then cost of home modifications. Again, a lot of times people say, I'm going to stay in my own home. Well, what happens if, your mobility changes? A lot of times this discussion doesn't take place until after a serious health event takes place or occurs. So, let's say a fall, a stroke, heart attack, something unexpected happens. Now, there's a hospital visit, perhaps rehab after that. And now there's this discussion. Is it safe to go home? Do we need to modify the home? Do we need to put this in or that in? Well, that's not the time to have that discussion. You need to think about those things in advance. So in your planning and in your financial planning, you have to think about that. And it's not just whether the bedroom's downstairs, whether you have to climb stairs. It's width of the hallways, height of the cabinets, tight spaces, flooring, lighting, all of these things, which can become really challenging and even dangerous later on. So you have to think through those things. And if you're planning to modify the home in any way, well, obviously that can be a pretty big expense. You have to factor that in as well. So these are just a few of the other things I would think about as you consider your planning. So I covered a lot in a short amount of time. Again, you're going to have a copy of this presentation available to you. And I know Lynn and the team there at Lakeview are more than happy to cover more of this with you at any time. So, Melissa, I don't know, I think you might have had a couple of questions that you wanted to get into or follow up. So
I will just say from personal experience, and this was just our personal experience, but we recently had a family member who was spending $30,000 a week on 24-hour care.
Yeah.
That's how big that number can be. that is a lot to take into consideration. So yeah, this is so helpful for everybody to get their head wrapped around just what every little tiny expense, how all of that can add up for sure. Let's throw up that slide if we can one more time, Brad, just in case folks haven't asked a question and they want to. There's a form on the screen right below where you're seeing the slide and me and Brad. Just put in your name, your question, hit submit, and that will go straight to Lakeview Village. They will make sure that Brad gets your question answered if he did not answer a question that you may have had today. So he will get that answered for sure to you. And those counselors there will help you get those questions answered as well. I also wanted to mention you have a book. And I love the name of it. What's the deal with retirement communities? And I know that Lakeview Village, of course, wants to provide a complimentary copy of that book to everybody who is watching today. And all they have to do is to reach out to Lakeview Village. I'm going to have Lynn's contact information. You mentioned her a couple times there. We'll have that on the screen here in just a few minutes. So everybody can jot that down if you want, but it's real easy, or you just reach out to Lakeview Village and they can connect you to a counselor there as well. So that's really good. Well, a question that I had, Brad, should we meet with Lakeview Village first or with our financial advisor first, or the other way around, especially at this moment when we are thinking about what our retirement living is going to look like? Yeah. Which way should we do it?
Well, I think it's really tough for an advisor to add a whole lot of value until they understand that the community. I mean, even if you're just talking pricing, they need to have that information before they can really do a whole lot. So understanding the things I went through today, how the contract works, particularly if it's life care, that's an important distinction. The pricing, all of those things, I think you need to be able to take that to your advisor and maybe even have the advisor with you and go to the community, visit together so that he or she can get that education together with you. And that way you're not having to sort of try to present it to the advisor.
And I believe that Lakeview could send this presentation, well, to those who are watching today for sure, but to be able to share some of that with your financial advisor could be really helpful. But as you said, if your financial advisor is willing to come with you to Lakeview Village when you're having those discussions, that's not a bad idea to do either. The other thing you mentioned a little bit was about that software that financial advisors will use to help us calculate what all of this is going to look like as you said, as we live through retirement, not to retirement, but through retirement. And some of them will go, I've got the latest and the greatest, and and that's great and all fine and well. Yeah. But there are things about a life care or life plan community, which, by the way, those words are interchangeable, a life care community that the software may or may not handle. Is that right?
I can't say that I'm not knowledgeable on every single type of financial planning software in existence, but I will say that the ones I am familiar with, they just don't get quite into some of the details. So as I said, I've always found I had to kind of finagle it a little bit, and that may be okay. I think one of the things, there's different types of advisors. Some really focus on your investment management, and that's all they do. That's all they want to do, and that's fine. Others are more holistic. They're going to run a full-blown financial plan for you and those kind of things. And some people want that from their advisor. So I think it really depends on what type of advisor you're working with and kind of what their expertise is and really how far into this kind of thing they want to go. But yeah, it's just hard to really enter the right information into the system if you don't understand some of what I've talked about. And even then, they don't sometimes even have a place to enter certain things into the system.
Gotcha. So. Yeah. And I think, we always say at Lakeview Village, the thing that's most important to us is that people are educated, that they're really understanding. As you were saying, you got to compare apples to apples, and that can sometimes be tough. And it's smart to be able to connect with Lakeview Village and their financial advisors to really make sure that you are getting all of that information. And you know, Lakeview says, even if you are not going to come to Lakeview or you change your mind and don't want to, they don't care. They just want you to be fully clear and really understand what you're comparing things to before you make that decision, for sure. Right. The other thing I want to make clear is that you don't work for Lakeview Village.
No.
You don't. Yeah. And because I can tell from what you say that life care communities are pretty good in your book. At least it seems that way, the way you describe it.
Yeah. Well, I'll put it to you this way. I'm a fan of the life care concept. Okay. Absolutely. Now, life care communities are like any other organization. There's, you know, some are better managed and better run than others. Sure. So I'm not saying every life care community you need to go like that. I recognize two things: that number one, everybody's situation is different, and you've got and it's not going to be the right choice for everybody. And number two, I think the organization, the management of that organization, the financial management is extremely important. I didn't get into any of that today, but understanding those things, you know, if they're well run and you can afford it and it's a good fit for you, then I am a big fan.
Gotcha. Okay. I just wanted to make it clear you weren't working for them. You do have that complimentary book that Lakeview Village is going to get to everybody who sees this presentation. All they have to do is to reach out to their counselors, as I mentioned a while ago, or if they don't have a contact at Lakeview Village yet, they can go to, and I'll put it up here on the screen. We'll see, L Tenbrink, which stands for Lynn Tenbrink, TENBRINK at lakeviewvillage.org, or you can call them there at 913-744-2449 and just let them know you want Brad's book, and by golly, they will get it to you. That's for sure. So anyway, thank you so much, Brad. Hey, do you have any parting thoughts here? Any information you'd like to share with us before you go?
The one thing I tend to, a lot of times at the end of presentations I do, I'll mention, and I think it's important to say here too, is that when you're thinking about this decision, it's not just trying to find a place to live, right? It's not, in fact, it's not even always about, I think for an advisor, it's easy their job is to find out, does it make good financial sense for you? And that's important. But what I always tell people is, even if it's a little more expensive, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad decision. I mean, it needs to be a good fit for you financially. I'm not saying stretch yourself, but assuming even if it's cost a little bit more, it may still be the right decision for people, because it's not necessarily about where to live. It's more about how to live. Right. I mean, it's more about how to live. It's really very much a lifestyle decision, and thinking about those social interactions and your circumstances. Do you have family nearby or not? And what would you want? All of that's so important. And there's a value to that you have to really think about.
That's a good point. That's a very good point. Brad Breeding, thank you for your expertise. Thanks for sharing with us today. Your presentation. And of course, we want to thank those who tuned in, and hopefully they feel like they have some valuable tools that they can take to their financial advisors and also bring to a meeting at Lakeview Village, if that's where all of this should lead. If folks have a question, any question about Lakeview Village, not just this one, again, you can reach out to us, and that telephone number is 913-744-2449. We'd be happy to answer your questions, or you can go again down to that form, even if it's a different kind of question and not about the presentation, shoot that over to us and we'll get your question answered. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Brad Breeding. Hope you're staying cool there in the Carolinas as we are here in Kansas City.
We're trying
to anyway. Yeah, trying to anyway. You bet. You bet. All right. Take good care. Appreciate you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.